where every story is a testament to the power of perseverance, hope, and the unstoppable spirit of women. Here, we share true tales of resilience and reinvention, stories that prove, no matter how dark the night, a woman's dawn can always break through. Today's story will take you on a journey that spans over 7 decades, through heartbreak so deep it could have destroyed a lesser woman, and love so fierce it defied every obstacle placed in its path. This is a story about class, pride, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter that even 22 years of silence couldn't sever. If you believe in the beauty of comebacks and the power of unconditional love, you're in the right place. The knock on my door came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, soft, hesitant, almost apologetic, like someone asking permission to exist. I knew that knock before I even opened my eyes. Even after 22 years of deafening silence, 22 years of unanswered letters and returned Christmas cards, 22 years of loving a ghost, a mother never forgets the sound of her child asking to come home. When I opened that door, there she stood, my Jessica, my baby girl who'd once called me her whole world, now broken and shivering in a $1,000 coat that couldn't warm the coldness in her soul. The woman who'd told me I wasn't her class anymore was standing on my doorstep with nowhere else to go, and all I could think was, thank God. Thank God she remembered the way home. My name is Emily Tyler. I'm 75 years old, and this is the story of how losing my daughter to wealth and status taught me that real riches can't be counted in dollars, and how our lowest moment became the foundation for both our greatest comeback. If stories of unconditional love, forgiveness, and a mother's unwavering faith inspire you, please subscribe to Her True Stories and hit that notification bell. Because sometimes the most beautiful reunions come wrapped in the most devastating packages, and every mother watching this needs to hear how love wins, even when it takes 22 years to prove it. Let me take you back to 1963, to a time when my world was small but complete, when love lived in every corner of a modest 2-bedroom house in Millfield, Ohio. I was Emily Tyler, 28 years old, single mother, professional dreamer, and the best waitress Murphy's Diner had ever seen. Picture a town where everybody knows everybody, where the biggest excitement is Friday night football and the annual Corn Festival, where dreams are measured not in millions but in the hope that your children might have it better than you did. That little diner was my kingdom. Red vinyl booths that had seen better decades, a jukebox that played the same Elvis song since the 50s, and coffee that could wake the dead. I knew every regular's order by heart, remembered their birthdays, listened to their troubles, and somehow made $35 in tips feel like treasure when you had a daughter to raise and dreams to fund. Our house sat on Maple Street, small even by Millfield standards, with paint that was more memory than color and a front porch that sagged just enough to give it character. But inside those walls lived something money couldn't buy: pure, uncomplicated love. The kitchen table was our command center, scratched and wobbly, but witness to 1,000 conversations, homework sessions, and shared meals that tasted like love even when they were just spaghetti and hope. Jessica was my everything, my reason for breathing, my proof that miracles come in the form of honey-colored hair and eyes that sparkled like emeralds when she laughed. She was born in 1958 when I was 23, her father a boy who disappeared the moment responsibility knocked on his door. But I didn't need him. Jessica and I were a team, a duo, a force of nature that couldn't be divided. Every morning in the early 1960s, she'd pad into the kitchen in her favorite pajamas, pink with dancing cats, and curl up in the chair beside me while I braided her hair for school. We'd share toast and orange juice, and she'd tell me her dreams in that serious way children have when they believe anything is possible. "Mama," she'd say, her small hands wrapped around her juice glass, "when I grow up, I'm going to be a lawyer and make lots of money, so you never have to work so hard again. We'll live in a big house with a swimming pool, and you can wear pretty dresses every day instead of that ugly uniform." I'd laugh and kiss the top of her head, inhaling the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Baby girl, I don't need pretty dresses or big houses. I just need you. But I want to give you everything, Mama." You deserve everything. That was Jessica. Even as a child in the 1960s, she saw how hard I worked, how I counted pennies and wore shoes until they fell apart, how I went without so she could have. There was something in her that burned bright and ambitious, a hunger not just for success, but for transformation, for elevation, for escape from the limitations that surrounded us. She was brilliant, my Jess. Report cards full of A's throughout the late 60s and early 70s, teachers who called her exceptional, standardized test scores that made guidance counselors talk about college possibilities that seemed impossible for a girl from our circumstances. I'd sit in parent-teacher conferences in 1970, still smelling like coffee and bacon from my shift, and listen to educators describe my daughter like she was some kind of miracle. Jessica has unlimited potential, Mrs. Henderson, her fifth-grade teacher, told me in 1968. With the right opportunities, she could go anywhere, do anything. I worked extra shifts to pay for her to join the debate team, sold my mother's wedding ring to buy her a dress for the academic awards banquet, took on catering jobs on weekends to save for her college fund. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in our shared future, in the life she dreamed of building for both of us. High school in the mid-1970s brought new dreams and new expenses. Jessica joined every club that might look good on college applications: debate team, honor society, student government, mock trial. She stayed after school for study groups and extra credit, came home with stories about classmates whose parents were doctors and lawyers and business owners in an era when women were just beginning to break into those professions. Sarah Mitchell's dad is taking the whole family to Europe this summer, she'd say in 1975, a wistful note in her voice. Can you imagine, Mama? Flying on an airplane, seeing the Eiffel Tower, eating real French food. Maybe someday, baby girl, I'd say, knowing that someday felt as distant as the moon for a single mother waitress in 1975. But Jessica wasn't bitter about what we didn't have, not then. She was determined, focused, driven by the belief that education was her ticket to a different life. She studied like her future depended on it because it did. Late at night, after my second shift ended, I'd come home to find her still at that wobbly kitchen table, textbooks spread around her like battle plans, her teenage face serious with concentration. You should get some sleep, Jess, I'd say, but she'd shake her head. I can't, Mama. Jenny Chen's parents hire her tutors for everything, and Marcus Williams has his own car. I have to work twice as hard to keep up. That was when I first noticed it. The awareness of what others had that we didn't, the subtle tension that came from being the scholarship kid in a world of growing prosperity. The late 70s brought changes to our little town, new money moving in, and Jessica watched it all with hungry eyes. Senior year of 1976 arrived like a promise about to be fulfilled. Jessica was valedictorian, had full scholarship offers from 3 universities, was the pride of Millfield High. The whole town talked about Emily Tyler's girl, how she was going places, how she was going to make something of herself in this new era when women could dream bigger than ever before. The night before graduation, we sat on our sagging front porch, sharing a pint of ice cream and watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Jessica was quiet, thoughtful, her cap and gown hanging on the door behind us like a flag of victory. I'm scared, Mama, she admitted suddenly. Scared of what, baby girl? What if I'm not good enough? What if I get to college and everyone's smarter than me, or richer, or more sophisticated? What if I don't fit in? I pulled her close, this beautiful young woman of 18, who still seemed like my little girl. You are good enough for anywhere, Jessica Tyler. You're smart, you're kind, you're determined. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. She leaned into me, and for a moment, we were just us again, mother and daughter, team and partnership, love in its purest form. I'm going to make you proud, Mama, she whispered. You already have, baby girl. You already have. The graduation ceremony was held in the school gymnasium in June 1976, decorated with blue and gold streamers and filled with families celebrating their children's achievements. I sat in the third row, wearing my best dress, a navy blue one I'd found at Goodwill, and altered to fit, with tears already threatening to spill before the ceremony even began. When they called Jessica's name as valedictorian, when she walked across that stage with her head held high and her future spread out before her like an endless highway, I thought my heart might burst with pride. She looked directly at me as she accepted her diploma, smiled that radiant smile that had been lighting up my world for 18 years, and mouthed the words that still echo in my memory. "We did it, Mama." Yes, we did it. Together. Against all odds, with nothing but love and determination, and an unshakable belief that dreams could come true if you worked hard enough, we had done it. But as I would learn in the years to come, sometimes success is just the beginning of a story. Sometimes achieving your dreams reveals new dreams you never knew you had. And sometimes the people you love most become collateral damage in your pursuit of a life you think you deserve. Looking back now, from my 75 years of living, I can see the signs I missed. The way Jessica's eyes lingered on the wealthy families at school events, how she grew quiet when her classmates talked about things we couldn't afford, the hunger in her voice when she spoke about wanting more. I thought that hunger would fuel her success. I never imagined it would consume the love we'd built together. College changed Jessica in ways I didn't recognize at first. Ohio State University in 1976 was a world away from our little town, massive and sophisticated, filled with students from backgrounds I could barely imagine. Jessica threw herself into campus life with the same determination she'd brought to high school, but now that determination had a different edge to it, a hunger that seemed to consume rather than create. Her freshman year of 1976 to 77, she called home every few days, full of stories about her classes, her professors, her new friends. But slowly, as the late 70s progressed, the stories changed. Less about academics, more about social events. Less about her roommate from rural Kentucky, more about the girls in her sorority who summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. "Mama, you should see how these girls live," she'd say during our weekly phone calls in 1978. Victoria's parents bought her a car just for college, a BMW. And Madison gets her hair done at this salon in Columbus that charges more for highlights than you make in a week. I'd laugh it off, thinking it was just wonder at a world different from ours. Well, baby girl, we all have different circumstances. You're there on merit, on your own hard work. That's something to be proud of. But I could hear something in her voice, a note I'd never heard before, not quite shame, but close to it. As if she was measuring our life against theirs and finding us wanting. Sophomore year of 1977 to 78 brought new vocabulary, networking events, connections, the right people. Jessica started talking about image and presentation, about how important it was to dress the part if you wanted to succeed. She needed new clothes for internship interviews, professional attire that cost more than my monthly grocery budget in 1978. "It's an investment, Mama," she'd say when I worried about the credit card bill. "You have to look successful to become successful." I worked extra shifts to pay for those clothes, picked up catering jobs on weekends, sold my grandmother's antique jewelry to help fund her dreams. Every sacrifice felt worthwhile when she called to tell me she'd landed a prestigious internship at a law firm in Columbus, that she was making the right connections, building the right network. But by 1979, the phone calls became shorter, less frequent. When she did call, she sounded distracted, like she was checking items off a to-do list rather than talking to her mother. The easy intimacy we'd always shared began to feel forced, stilted, as if we were actors playing roles in a relationship that used to be natural. Junior year of 1979 to 80 brought the biggest change of all. Christopher Whitmore III. Not Chris, not Christopher, the full name, every time, pronounced like a prayer to prosperity. Jessica's voice changed when she talked about him, took on a breathless quality that made my stomach clench with worry I couldn't quite name. "Christopher Whitmore III's family owns half of Columbus, Mama," she'd say in late 1979, and I could hear the awe in her voice, the wonder of someone who'd never expected to exist in such rarefied air. His great-grandfather founded Whitmore Industries back in the 1920s. They have a foundation, sponsor the opera, donate to the university. They're in the society pages. "That's nice, honey," I'd say, though something about the way she talked about his family's money made me uncomfortable. But what's he like as a person? Is he kind to you? Does he make you laugh? Oh, Mama, she'd sigh, as if I was missing the point entirely. He's sophisticated. Cultured. He went to private schools his whole life, speaks 3 languages, has been to Europe a dozen times. He's everything I've always wanted to become. Wanted to become. Not wanted to be with, wanted to become. As if Christopher Whitmore 3 wasn't just her boyfriend, but her transformation blueprint, her ticket to a life she'd only dreamed of. The changes accelerated after that. Jessica stopped coming home for weekend visits during 1980, claimed she was too busy with Christopher's social calendar. When I suggested driving up to Columbus to see her, she'd find excuses. Wrong weekend, too much studying, Christopher's family had plans. You wouldn't fit in with his crowd anyway, Mama, she said during one particularly painful phone call in spring 1980. They're very particular about these things. Particular about what things I wanted to ask, but I was afraid of the answer. Our conversations became awkward dance routines where we both tried to avoid stepping on landmines. I'd ask about her classes. She'd pivot to talk about charity galas and country club events. I'd share news from home. She'd respond with distracted mhms that made it clear her mind was elsewhere. The Jessica who used to call me her best friend, who'd shared every thought and dream and worry, was disappearing. In her place was someone who sounded like her, but spoke in a language I didn't understand, a vocabulary of connections and networking and social climbing that had no room for a small-town waitress mother. Christmas of 1980 was the first one she didn't come home for. Christopher's family has this tradition, she explained, her voice carefully neutral. We're spending the holidays at their estate in Naples. It's important for me to be there. Important for her to be there, but not important for her to be with the woman who'd raised her, who'd worked double shifts to pay for her education, who'd loved her unconditionally for 22 years. I spent that Christmas alone in our little house, staring at the tree I'd decorated with ornaments she'd made in elementary school, eating dinner for one, and trying not to cry into my mashed potatoes. I was 45 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly alone. Senior year of 1980 to 81 brought the engagement announcement, but not from Jessica. I learned about it the way strangers did, from the Columbus Dispatch Society page in spring 1981, which someone at the diner showed me with poorly disguised pity mixed with excitement. "Isn't this your Jessica?" Marge asked, sliding the newspaper across the counter during the breakfast rush. There she was, my beautiful daughter, radiant in diamonds that probably cost more than I'd made in the last 5 years, standing next to a man who looked like he'd been carved from marble and privilege. She was wearing a dress that screamed designer, her hair styled in a way that erased every trace of the girl who used to let me braid it every morning. The caption read, "Miss Jessica Tyler, daughter of Emily Tyler of Millfield, announces her engagement to Christopher Whitmore III, son of Margaret and Christopher Whitmore Jr. of Columbus. The bride-elect will graduate summa cum laude from The Ohio State University in June with a degree in pre-law. The prospective groom is a 1979 graduate of Harvard Business School and serves as vice president of Whitmore Industries. A summer wedding is planned. Daughter of Emily Tyler of Millfield." As if I were a footnote in her fairy tale, a minor character whose only role was to provide genetic material for the real star of the story. The wedding was set for August 1981. Jessica would be 23, I would be 46, and somehow in those 23 years of loving her with everything I had, I'd become someone she was ashamed to acknowledge. But I was still her mother. And despite everything, despite the distance and the coolness and the growing chasm between our worlds, I believed that love had to count for something. I believed that on her wedding day, she'd remember who had raised her, who had sacrificed for her dreams, who had loved her unconditionally since the day she was born. I was about to learn just how wrong I could be. The formal wedding invitation arrived in June 1981, heavy paper with raised lettering that seemed designed to announce not just an event, but a transformation. "Mr. and Mrs. Christopher Whitmore Jr. request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Christopher Whitmore III, to Miss Jessica Tyler, Saturday, the 15th of August, 1981. Miss Jessica Tyler, soon to be Mrs. Christopher Whitmore III." soon to be someone I apparently didn't know at all. The ceremony was scheduled for the Whitmore family estate, black tie required. I stared at those 3 words for a long time, knowing they were more than a dress code. They were a barrier, a test, a way of ensuring that people like me understood we didn't belong. But she was my daughter. My daughter was getting married in August 1981, and I was going to be there, no matter how unwelcome I felt, no matter how much it cost me, no matter how badly I fit into her new world. I spent the next 2 months planning for that wedding like a military campaign. I used my entire savings account, the emergency fund I'd built up penny by penny over the years, to buy an appropriate outfit. Not just a dress this time, but shoes and a purse, and even a small hat that the saleswoman assured me was quite elegant for formal occasions. I was 46 years old, had been working since I was 16, and I'd never owned anything that cost as much as that wedding outfit. But for Jessica, for my baby girl's special day, it felt like a worthwhile investment. The morning of August 15th, 1981, I drove to Columbus with my heart hammering against my ribs, the radio playing love songs that made me cry for reasons I couldn't quite name. The day was perfect, summer sunshine, blue skies, the kind of weather that makes you believe in happy endings. The Whitmore estate was transformed for the occasion, draped in white silk and covered in flowers that probably cost more than most people's cars. Guests began arriving in luxury vehicles, Cadillacs and Mercedes and BMWs, women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos that fit like they'd been sewn onto their bodies. I parked my 1975 Honda Civic between a Mercedes and a Lincoln Continental, feeling like a dandelion in a rose garden. But I held my head high as I walked toward the reception area, reminding myself that I belonged here because I was Jessica's mother, because I'd earned the right to witness her happiness. The ceremony was held in the estate's rose garden, with Jessica walking down an aisle lined with flowers that looked like they'd been arranged by angels. She was breathtaking in her wedding dress, a creation of silk and lace that must have cost more than I made in a year, her face radiant with happiness that took my breath away. For a moment, watching her glide down that aisle on the arm of Christopher's father, since she had no father of her own to give her away, I forgot about everything else. This was my baby girl, my Jessica, the child I'd rocked to sleep and helped with homework and cheered for at every school event. Whatever had changed between us, whatever distance had grown, she was still mine in this moment, still the most beautiful thing I'd ever created. But when her eyes swept over the assembled guests, when they found me sitting in the back row where I'd been relegated, there was no recognition, no smile, no acknowledgement that the woman who'd raised her was there to witness the most important day of her life. The reception was held in an enormous white tent that had been erected on the estate's back lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from the tent ceiling, and every table was decorated with centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I was seated at a table in the far corner, surrounded by people I didn't know and who clearly didn't want to know me. The conversation flowed around me in a language of privilege and wealth that I couldn't speak. Discussions of vacation homes in the Hamptons and private schools for children and investments that went over my head like artillery fire. These people weren't just wealthy. They were generationally wealthy, secure in their position in a way that made my working-class background feel like something foreign and shameful. I watched Jessica move through the crowd like a queen holding court, elegant and confident and completely transformed. She danced with her new husband, laughed with her new family, posed for photographs that would probably appear in society magazines. She was radiant, successful, everything she'd ever dreamed of becoming. And I was invisible. Hours passed without her speaking to me, without even acknowledging my presence. I sat at that table, picking at food I couldn't taste, watching my daughter celebrate the biggest day of her life, as if I didn't exist. The other guests at my table made polite conversation for a while, but when they learned I was just a waitress from a small town, their interest evaporated like morning dew. As the evening wore on, I watched Jessica's transformation with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. She moved through these social circles with an ease that was both impressive and heartbreaking. Impressive because she'd clearly mastered a world so different from the one she'd been born into. heartbreaking because that mastery seemed to require erasing every trace of where she'd come from. Finally, as the reception wound down and guests began to leave, I couldn't take it anymore. I approached her during a quiet moment when she was standing alone near the gift table, adjusting her veil. "Jessica," I said softly, "you look beautiful, sweetheart." She turned, and for just a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, maybe even pleasure. But it was quickly replaced by that careful, distant politeness she'd perfected. "Thank you, Mama," she said, but the words sounded strange in her mouth, like she was speaking a foreign language. "I'm so happy for you, baby girl. I know this is everything you wanted." She glanced around nervously, as if checking to see who might be watching us, who might be witnessing this interaction between the elegant new Mrs. Whitmore and the small-town waitress who'd raised her. "I appreciate you coming," she said, her voice formal, detached, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than the woman who'd given birth to her. "Of course I came. You're my daughter. I love you." That's when her composure finally cracked, just slightly. She pulled me aside, away from the other guests, and for a moment I thought we might have a real conversation, a real connection. "Mama," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I need you to understand something." "What is it, honey?" She took a breath, and I could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to say. In the twilight of that August evening in 1981, standing in the shadow of a mansion that cost more than most people would make in a lifetime, my daughter prepared to break my heart in ways I never could have imagined. "This is my life now," she said, her voice steady but her eyes filled with something that looked like desperation. "This is who I am now. Christopher's family, their friends, their world. This is where I belong." "I know that, Jessica. I'm proud of you for—" "No, you don't understand." Her voice was sharper now, edged with something that sounded like panic. "I can't be that girl from Millfield anymore. I can't be the daughter of a waitress who lives in a falling-down house and drives a beat-up car. That person doesn't exist in this world." The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully aimed at the heart of who I was, who we'd been together. "Jessica, that girl from Millfield is who made this possible. That girl studied hard and earned scholarships and—" "That girl was a stepping stone," she interrupted, her eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before. "A phase I had to go through to get here. But I'm not her anymore, and I can't pretend to be." I stared at my daughter, this beautiful stranger in a wedding dress, and felt something inside me crack open like an egg. "What are you saying?" She looked around again, making sure we weren't being overheard, then stepped closer to me. "I'm saying that this marriage, this family, this life, it's everything I've worked for. Everything I've dreamed of. And I can't let anything jeopardize it." "Anything like what?" "Anything like a mother who doesn't fit, who embarrasses me, who reminds everyone where I came from." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for years and finally couldn't contain them anymore. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, felt the world tilt sideways in a way that made me dizzy. "I embarrass you?" "Yes," she whispered, and the word was like a knife sliding between my ribs. "Yes, you do. Your clothes, your accent, your stories about the diner and our little house, it all reminds people that I'm not really one of them, that I'm pretending to be something I'm not." "You're not pretending, Jessica. You've earned your place here through hard work and intelligence and I need to protect it," she said fiercely. "I need to make sure nothing threatens what I've built. Do you understand?" I understood. I understood that my daughter was asking me to disappear from her life so she could preserve her new one. I understood that the love I'd given her, the sacrifices I'd made, the years of devotion and support, none of it mattered compared to her fear of being exposed as someone who'd once been poor. "So, what are you asking me to do?" I said, though I already knew the answer. "I'm asking you to let me go," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "I'm asking you to understand that I can't be your daughter anymore. Not the way I used to be. Not in a way that fits into this life." The reception continued around us, music and laughter and celebration, while my world collapsed into pieces too small to put back together. "Jessica," I whispered. I'm your mother. I know, she said, and there were tears in her eyes now, but her voice remained steady. And I'm grateful for everything you did. But gratitude doesn't change the facts. You don't belong in this world, Mama. And I can't keep trying to make you fit. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. There's some money in here, she said, pressing it into my hands. Enough to cover your expenses for today and a little extra. Consider it payment for services rendered. Payment for services rendered. 23 years of unconditional love, reduced to a transaction. Jessica. Please, she said, stepping backward, away from me, away from everything we'd once been together. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Please just let me have this life. Let me be happy. She turned to go, then stopped and looked back at me one last time. Don't call, she said quietly. Don't write. Don't try to contact me. I need you to understand that as far as this family is concerned, as far as my new life is concerned, Emily Tyler doesn't exist. And then she walked away, back to her husband and her new family and her new world, leaving me standing alone in a corner of her wedding reception, wearing a dress I couldn't afford to attend a celebration I apparently had no right to be part of. I left without saying goodbye to anyone, drove home through tears so thick I had to pull over twice to compose myself. When I got back to our little house on Maple Street, I sat in Jessica's old room and sobbed until there were no tears left. That was August 15th, 1981. I was 46 years old, and my daughter had just erased me from her life as completely as if I'd never existed. 22 years would pass before I saw her again. The years after Jessica's wedding passed in a blur of emptiness and stubborn hope. I was 46 years old in 1981, still young enough to rebuild my life, but I couldn't seem to let go of the daughter-shaped hole in my heart. I kept working at Murphy's Diner, kept living in our little house, kept hoping that someday she'd remember who I was. The 1980s crept by with agonizing slowness. I learned about Jessica's life through scraps. A neighbor who mentioned seeing her name in a Columbus magazine in 1983, a customer at the diner who'd heard she'd had children. 2 children, as it turned out, born in 1984 and 1987. Grandchildren I'd never meet, babies who would grow up never knowing that their grandmother existed. I sent birthday cards that were never acknowledged, Christmas gifts that were never mentioned. I wrote letters I never sent, poured my heart onto pages that ended up in a shoebox under my bed. Every year, I drive past the Columbus exit on the highway and think about stopping, about showing up at whatever mansion they lived in and demanding to see my grandchildren. But Jessica's words from her wedding night echoed in my memory. Don't call. Don't write. Don't try to contact me. Some nights, especially during the holidays, I'd sit in her old room, holding the photos from her childhood, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Had I not loved her enough? Had I embarrassed her so thoroughly that she couldn't bear the sight of me? The questions ate at me like acid, especially as I entered my 50s and realized that this exile might last forever. My friends at the diner tried to convince me to move on. She's made her choice, Emily, they'd say. You can't force someone to love you. But they didn't understand. She was my child, my heart walking around outside my body. You don't give up on your heart, even when it breaks yours. The 1990s brought new challenges. I was in my 50s now, my back ached from decades of waitressing, and I started to worry about what would happen when I could no longer work. I had no family except a daughter who disowned me, no savings except what I could scrape together from tips and my small salary. For the first time, I began to understand the fear that drives people to make desperate choices. That's when I found my calling, quite by accident. In 1995, when I was 60, a new women's shelter opened in the county seat, 30 minutes from Millfield. They needed volunteers, and I found myself drawn to the idea of helping women who'd lost everything, who'd been thrown away by the people who were supposed to love them. Maybe if I couldn't save my relationship with Jessica, I could help save someone else's. The Sunrise Women's Shelter was housed in a converted church, with room for 20 women and their children. Most of the residents were fleeing domestic violence, but some were there because of economic hardship, divorce, or addiction. They came with nothing but the clothes on their backs and hearts full of shame and fear. I started by serving meals and doing laundry, simple tasks that didn't require special training. But gradually, the women began to talk to me. Maybe it was my age. At 60, I was old enough to be a mother figure to most of them. Maybe it was the sadness they sensed in me, a recognition of shared pain. Whatever the reason, they sought me out during their darkest moments. I don't know how to start over. A 30-year-old named Maria told me one evening in 1996. She'd fled an abusive marriage with her 3 children, leaving behind everything she'd ever known. I'm 30 years old, and I feel like my life is over. Your life isn't over, I told her, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. It's just beginning again. Sometimes the best chapters come after you think the story has ended. As I spoke those words to Maria, I realized I was speaking them to myself too. I was 61 years old, had been abandoned by my daughter 15 years earlier, and I was still breathing, still functioning, still capable of love and kindness. Maybe my story wasn't over either. I started taking evening classes at the community college, studying social work. If I was going to help broken women rebuild their lives, I wanted to do it right. The classes were challenging. I was often the oldest student by decades, but they gave me purpose beyond my own pain. Martha Rodriguez came to the shelter in 1998. She was 55, my age when Jessica got married, and her situation was heartbreakingly familiar. Her husband of 25 years had left her for a younger woman, cleaned out their bank accounts, and left her with nothing but debt and shame. Her children had sided with their father, claimed she was too emotional and needed to get over it. I gave him everything, she sobbed in my makeshift office one Tuesday afternoon. My youth, my dreams, my identity. I don't even know who I am without him. And my kids, they look at me like I'm this pathetic old woman who should just disappear quietly. You're Martha, I said simply. You're a woman who loved deeply, who gave generously, who survived betrayal. You're a woman who's strong enough to start over. Just like I am. As I spoke those words to Martha, I realized something profound was happening. For 17 years, I defined myself by what I'd lost, my daughter's love, my role as mother, my place in her life. But sitting across from Martha, helping her see her own worth, I began to understand that I was more than just Jessica's abandoned mother. How do you do it? Martha asked. How do you keep going when the people you love most throw you away? You learn that your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it, I said, surprised by the wisdom in my own words. You learn that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger. And you learn that sometimes the best way to heal your own heart is to help heal someone else's. Martha stayed at the shelter for 6 months, and I watched her transform from a broken woman into someone who knew her own value. She got her GED, then an associate's degree, eventually became a nurse. Years later, she'd send me Christmas cards from the hospital where she worked, thanking me for helping her find herself again. But Martha wasn't the only one who was transformed. Each woman I helped, each life I touched, added another layer to my understanding of who I was beyond my relationship with Jessica. I wasn't just a discarded mother. I was a healer, a guide, a woman who could take her own pain and use it to light the way for others. By 2000, when I turned 65, I'd completed my degree in social work and was officially hired as a counselor at the shelter. The local newspaper did a feature on me. Local Woman Turns Personal Pain into Community Healing. They interviewed women I'd helped, talked about the programs I'd developed, the lives I'd touched. For the first time in decades, I felt proud of who I was, not as Jessica's mother, but as Emily Tyler, a woman who'd built something meaningful from the ashes of her dreams. The new millennium brought changes I never expected. I was 65, officially a senior citizen, but I felt more purposeful than I had in years. The shelter had expanded, and I was now the director, overseeing programs that helped hundreds of women each year transition from crisis to stability. One day in 2001, 20 years after Jessica's wedding, I was reviewing applications for our new transitional housing program when something stopped me cold. The name on one application. Jennifer Whitmore, age 22, seeking emergency shelter after leaving an abusive relationship. Whitmore. The same last name as Christopher's family. My hands trembling, I read through the application. Jennifer was young, well-educated, from a wealthy family in Columbus. She'd been disowned after reporting her boyfriend's abuse to police. Apparently, he was the son of one of her family's business partners, and her accusations were inconvenient for their social circle. My family says I'm lying, she'd written in careful script. They say I'm ungrateful and dramatic. They've cut off all financial support and told me I'm no longer welcome in their home. I have nowhere else to go. When Jennifer arrived at the shelter, I saw immediately that she was different from our usual residents. Her clothes were expensive despite being wrinkled, her accent polished, her mannerisms those of someone raised with privilege. But her eyes held the same lost, desperate look I'd seen in hundreds of other women who'd been cast aside by the people who were supposed to love them. "I've never been anywhere like this," she admitted during our intake interview, looking around the shelter's modest common room. "I don't know how to exist without money, without my family's support." "You learn," I told her gently, "one day at a time, the same way all of us do." Over the next few weeks, I watched Jennifer struggle with the reality of life without her family's wealth and protection. She'd never done her own laundry, never cooked a meal, never worried about money. But she was determined to survive, to build a life on her own terms. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked one evening after I'd spent extra time helping her navigate the job application process. "I'm sure you can tell I come from money. Doesn't that bother you?" "Money doesn't make people good or bad," I said. "And being born wealthy doesn't mean you don't deserve help when you need it. Everyone deserves compassion." "My family doesn't think so. They think poor people are poor because they're lazy, because they make bad choices. They say if I wanted their help, I shouldn't have embarrassed them." The words hit close to home, though Jennifer had no way of knowing why. "Families sometimes value their image more than their love," I said carefully. "That says something about them, not about you." Jennifer stayed at the shelter for 3 months before finding a job and her own apartment. On her last day, she hugged me tightly. "You saved my life," she said. "Not just practically, but you helped me understand that I'm worth saving. That I don't have to be ashamed of needing help." "Promise me something," I said. "When you're back on your feet, when you've built the life you want, remember the women who are still struggling. Remember that everyone's story is more complicated than it appears." "I will," she promised. "I'll never forget." Watching Jennifer leave, I thought about Jessica. My daughter would be 43 now, presumably still living her privileged life in Columbus. Did she ever think about me? Did she ever wonder what had happened to the woman who'd raised her? Or had she succeeded so completely in erasing me from her existence that I'd become nothing more than a distant memory? I was 70 years old now, and I'd learned to build a life that didn't revolve around the daughter-shaped hole in my heart. It wasn't the life I'd dreamed of when Jessica was small, but it was a good life, a meaningful life. I'd helped hundreds of women find their strength, had become a respected figure in my community, had created a legacy that extended far beyond my own family. Still, in the quiet moments before dawn, I wondered about her. I wondered if she was happy, if her children were healthy, if she ever missed the simple love we'd shared in our little house on Maple Street. Most of all, I wondered if she'd learned the difference between having money and being rich, between being successful and being significant. I never stopped believing that someday she might remember the love that had shaped her first 23 years. But I'd stopped waiting for that day to define my own worth. The years of my 70s were supposed to be about slowing down, about retirement and grandchildren and quiet contentment. Instead, they became the most purposeful years of my life. By 2003, when I was 68, the Sunrise Women's Shelter had become a model program studied by social workers from across the state. We'd helped over 2,000 women transition from crisis to stability, and I'd become something I never expected, an expert in human resilience. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become a specialist in helping women rebuild relationships with family members who'd rejected them when I couldn't rebuild my own relationship with Jessica. But perhaps that pain had given me insight into the particular kind of heartbreak that comes from being discarded by someone you love unconditionally. "Mrs. Tyler," said Amanda Chin, a young woman who'd come to us in 2004 after her family disowned her for marrying outside their race. "How do you help women like me when you've never been through anything like this yourself?" I looked at Amanda, brilliant, beautiful, cast aside by people who claimed to love her, and made a decision I'd never made before. "Actually," I said quietly, "I have been through something very much like this." For the first time in 23 years, I told someone about Jessica. I told Amanda about raising a daughter alone, about sacrificing everything for her education, about the pride I'd felt watching her succeed, and about the wedding day when she'd asked me to disappear from her life. She told me I wasn't her class anymore. I said, the words still painful after all these years. She said I embarrassed her, that I didn't fit into the life she'd built. Amanda stared at me in shock. "But you're so accomplished, so respected. You have a degree, you run this place, you've helped so many people." "All of that came after," I explained. "When Jessica rejected me, I was just a small-town waitress who'd never been to college, who wore second-hand clothes and lived in a house that was falling apart. In her new world, that made me worthless." "How did you survive it?" Amanda whispered. "One day at a time," I said. "Some days I didn't think I would. But I learned that you can't control who loves you, only how much love you have to give. And I learned that being rejected by one person, even the most important person, doesn't diminish your value." Word spread quietly among the residents that Mrs. Tyler understood their pain in a deeply personal way. Women who'd been disowned by families, rejected by children, cast aside by spouses began seeking me out specifically. They found comfort in knowing that someone who'd survived such profound rejection could still build a life of meaning and purpose. In 2005, when I was 70, the state of Ohio honored me with an award for excellence in social work. The ceremony was held in Columbus, just miles from where Jessica presumably still lived. As I stood on that stage, accepting recognition for a career built from the ashes of maternal heartbreak, I wondered if she might see the news coverage, if she might realize what I'd become in the years since she dismissed me as worthless. But I'd learned not to live for her approval. The applause of strangers couldn't heal the wound she'd left, but it could validate the life I'd built despite it. Margaret Williams came to us in 2006, a 65-year-old woman whose adult children had placed her in a nursing home against her will after their father's death, claiming she was too emotional to live independently. She'd escaped and made her way to our shelter, one of the few places that accepted older women in crisis. "They took everything," she told me, her voice hollow. "My house, my car, my savings. They said I wasn't competent to manage my own affairs because I cried too much after Harold died. 43 years of marriage, and they expected me to get over his death like it was a cold." Margaret's story hit close to home. She was my age, dealing with children who decided she was an inconvenience, who'd used legal manipulation to control her life. Working with her, I realized how much I'd grown in the decades since Jessica's rejection. The Emily Tyler of 1981 might have crumbled under such treatment. The Emily Tyler of 2006 knew how to fight back. "We're going to get you a lawyer," I told Margaret. "We're going to challenge their guardianship petition, and we're going to prove that grieving doesn't make you incompetent." It took 8 months, but we won. Margaret got her independence back, along with control of her finances and the right to live where she chose. More importantly, she got her dignity back. "How did you know how to fight this?" she asked after the final court hearing. "Because I've been fighting for my own dignity for 25 years, I said. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us most are the ones who try hardest to make us disappear. But we don't have to cooperate with our own erasure." By 2007, I was 72 and supposedly ready to retire. The shelter board kept hinting that I should step down, let someone younger take over. But I wasn't ready to stop. This work had become my mission, my calling, my way of transforming personal pain into public good. That's when Linda Patterson arrived. Linda was 58, a successful businesswoman whose daughter had cut off all contact after Linda refused to loan her money for what Linda suspected was a drug habit. The daughter had turned Linda's grandchildren against her, telling them their grandmother was mean and selfish. "I see my grandson at the grocery store sometimes," Linda told me during our first session. "He looks right through me like I'm invisible. He's 8 years old, and he's been taught to hate me for trying to protect him." Linda's pain was so familiar it made my chest ache. "How long has it been since you've spoken to your daughter?" 3 years. She says I can have a relationship with her and the kids again when I'm ready to support her choices financially. But I know where that money goes. I know what those choices are doing to her, to those babies. "So you chose to love her enough to say no, even though it cost you everything?" "Yes. And now I wonder if I made the right choice. Maybe I should have just given her the money. Maybe I should have enabled her addiction if it meant staying in my grandchildren's lives." I looked at Linda, seeing my own reflection in her grief. "Do you think enabling someone's self-destruction is really love?" "No. But this isolation, this rejection, it's killing me. I lie awake at night wondering if my grandchildren think I abandoned them." "What you did took more courage than giving her money would have," I said. "You loved her enough to risk her hatred. That's not abandonment. That's the most profound kind of love there is." Working with Linda forced me to examine my own situation from a new angle. I'd always assumed that Jessica's rejection was entirely about my inadequacy, my failure to meet her standards. But what if it was also about her inability to accept love that came without conditions, love that couldn't be bought or earned through social status? In all my years of helping other women, I'd learned that children who reject loving parents often do so because that love reminds them of something they're afraid to face about themselves. Jessica's need to erase me from her life might have been less about my unworthiness and more about her own insecurity, her fear that accepting my love would expose the artificial nature of the world she'd bought into. It was a revolutionary thought for me, that her rejection might say more about her fears than about my failures. As 2008 approached, I was 73 years old and had been living without my daughter for 27 years. I'd built a life of purpose and meaning, had touched hundreds of lives, had become a woman worthy of respect in her own right. But still, in the quiet moments, I wondered about Jessica. Did she ever think about the woman who'd raised her? Did she miss the simple love we'd shared in our little house? Had she learned, in all her years of wealth and status, the difference between being successful and being significant? I'd stopped expecting answers to those questions. I'd stopped waiting for her to remember her way back to me. But I'd never stopped loving her, and I'd never stopped believing that love, real love, unconditional love, was the most powerful force in the universe. I just hadn't expected that belief to be tested in the most devastating way possible. In 2009, when I was 74 years old, something extraordinary happened that would change everything I thought I knew about my daughter's life. It began with a phone call on a cold February morning while I was reviewing case files in my office at the shelter. "Mrs. Tyler?" The voice was young, female, nervous. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling about your daughter, Jessica Whitmore." My heart stopped. In 28 years, no one had ever called me about Jessica. Is she all right?" "She's fine, physically. But Mrs. Tyler, I work at the Columbus Dispatch and I've been investigating a story about Whitmore Industries. I think there are some things you should know about your daughter's situation." Sarah explained that she'd been looking into irregularities in Whitmore Industries' financial reports when she discovered that Christopher Whitmore III was under federal investigation for embezzlement and fraud. The investigation had been ongoing for 2 years, but it was about to become public. "Mrs. Tyler, I found your name in some old society page archives, and I've been trying to understand the family dynamics. From what I can tell, your daughter might not know how serious the situation is. The FBI is planning arrests within the next few months." My mind raced. Jessica was 51 years old now, had been married to Christopher for 28 years. If he was arrested for federal crimes, her entire world would collapse. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because from what I've learned about the Whitmore family, they're the type of people who'll throw your daughter under the bus to protect themselves. When this hits the news, She's going to need someone who actually cares about her, not just her social status. After Sarah hung up, I sat in my office for hours, staring out the window at the February snow, trying to process what I'd learned. My daughter, who'd built her life on the foundation of her husband's wealth and status, was about to lose everything. The family that had been more important to her than her own mother was about to abandon her. And despite everything she'd done to me, despite 28 years of silence and rejection, my first instinct was to protect her. That night, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I drove to Columbus. I didn't go to her house. I didn't even know where she lived anymore. Instead, I drove through the wealthy neighborhoods where she probably lived, looking at mansion after mansion, wondering which one housed the daughter who'd erase me from her life. As I drove, I thought about the scared 23-year-old who'd been so desperate to fit into this world that she'd sacrificed her own mother to achieve it. I thought about the choices she'd made, the life she'd built, the identity she'd constructed on such a fragile foundation. And for the first time in 28 years, I felt sorry for her. The arrests came in May 2009. Christopher Whitmore III was taken into custody on charges of embezzling over $50 million from company pension funds and defrauding investors through false financial reports. The story dominated Columbus news for weeks, with details about the family's lavish lifestyle funded by stolen money. I watched the coverage obsessively, looking for any mention of Jessica. When she finally appeared in news photos, leaving the courthouse after Christopher's arraignment, I barely recognized her. She looked older than her 51 years, her face drawn and frightened, her usual polish replaced by obvious distress. The society page that had once celebrated her marriage now covered her downfall with barely concealed glee. "Local society matron falls from grace," read one headline. The articles detailed how the Whitmore family had immediately distanced themselves from Christopher, claiming they'd had no knowledge of his crimes. Jessica's name was mentioned only as his wife, with speculation about whether she'd be charged as an accomplice. 3 months later, in August 2009, exactly 28 years after her wedding, Jessica's world collapsed completely. Christopher was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Their assets were frozen pending restitution proceedings. The mansion, the cars, the jewelry. Everything was seized to repay the victims of his fraud. And that's when I received the call I'd been both dreading and hoping for. "Mrs. Tyler?" The voice was weak, broken, barely recognizable. This is Jessica. Your daughter." My daughter. After 28 years of silence, she was calling herself my daughter again. "Jessica," I whispered, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. "Where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm at the Columbus police station," she said, her voice shaking. "I've been released on my own recognizance, but I don't have anywhere to go. The house is gone, the cars are gone, everything is gone. And Mama," her voice broke completely. "Mama, I don't have anyone else to call." For 28 years, I'd imagined this moment, the call where she'd need me again, where she'd remember that I was her mother. I'd pictured myself being strong, composed, maybe even a little cold. I'd earned the right to make her grovel, to remind her of everything she'd put me through. Instead, I just said, "I'll be right there." The drive to Columbus that night was the longest 3 hours of my life. I was 74 years old, driving through a thunderstorm to rescue the daughter who'd spent half my lifetime pretending I didn't exist. But she was my child, and when your child falls, you catch them, even if they pushed you away in the first place. The Columbus police station was nothing like the gleaming world Jessica had married into. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, the smell of industrial cleaner and desperation. When they brought her out, I almost didn't recognize her. This wasn't the radiant bride from the society pages or the polished socialite I'd glimpsed in magazine photos over the years. This was a broken woman in an expensive suit that no longer fit her circumstances, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, her manicured hands shaking as she signed paperwork. When she saw me, she froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other across that sterile room, mother and daughter, separated by 28 years of pride and pain and stubborn silence. I saw her as she really was for the first time in decades, not the sophisticated socialite she'd become, but the scared young woman who'd been so desperate to escape her origins that she'd sacrificed everything real and true to achieve it. Then she broke. "Mama," she whispered, and collapsed into sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. I didn't hesitate. I crossed that room and wrapped my arms around the daughter I'd never stopped loving, held her while she cried 28 years' worth of tears. She felt so small, so fragile, nothing like the powerful woman she'd tried to become. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I ruined everything. I lost everything. I don't have anywhere to go." "You have me," I whispered into her hair, gray now where it used to be honey-colored. "You've always had me." The drive back to Millfield was quiet except for Jessica's occasional sobs. She told me bits and pieces. Christopher's arrest, the FBI raids, the discovery that their entire fortune was built on lies and stolen money. Their house was gone, their cars, their bank accounts, everything. Even worse, she discovered that Christopher had other women, other lives, that their entire marriage had been as fraudulent as his business dealings. "The children barely know me," she said softly as we pulled into Millfield. "I was so busy being the perfect society wife that I let the nannies raise my own babies. And now they're staying with Christopher's sister, and she says they're better off without me." My heart broke for her. Not because she'd lost her money or her status, but because she'd lost herself somewhere along the way, and in doing so, had lost the relationships that should have mattered most. We pulled up to our little house, the same house she'd been ashamed of 28 years ago. It looked smaller than ever, with its peeling paint and tiny front yard. But it was home, and it was hers if she wanted it. "It's not much," I said, feeling suddenly nervous. Would she judge it all over again? Would the woman who'd lived in mansions be able to accept shelter in the house she'd once considered beneath her? Jessica looked at the house, then at me, and for the first time in hours, she smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one from society photos. "It's perfect," she said. "It's home." The first few weeks of Jessica's return were awkward in ways I hadn't expected. Here was my 51-year-old daughter, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, trying to navigate a world where she couldn't write checks to solve problems, where she had to consider the cost of everything from groceries to gas. Watching her struggle with ordinary tasks was both heartbreaking and enlightening. She'd lived for nearly 3 decades in a world where staff handled every detail of daily life. She didn't know how to do laundry, couldn't cook anything more complicated than toast, had never balanced a checkbook. The practical skills I'd tried to teach her as a child, skills she dismissed as beneath her aspirations, were skills she desperately needed now. "How do you use this thing?" she asked one morning, staring at my ancient washing machine like it was a piece of alien technology. "The same way I taught you when you were 12, I said gently. "Before you decided you were too good for household chores." She flinched at the reminder, but she learned. Day by day, I watched her rediscover competencies she'd forgotten, watched her remember that she was capable of taking care of herself without an army of servants. More difficult than the practical adjustments were the emotional ones. Jessica was dealing with the reality that the people she'd considered her family, the Whitmores, had abandoned her the moment she became a liability. Christopher's mother, Margaret, had publicly stated that Jessica was an unfortunate influence on Christopher and that the family couldn't be held responsible for the choices of in-laws. 28 years, Jessica said one evening as we sat on the front porch, sharing coffee and watching the sunset. 28 years, I tried to prove I belonged in their world. I changed everything about myself, the way I talked, the way I dressed, the way I thought. I even changed the way I loved, made it conditional on status and appearance. And, the moment things got difficult, they threw me away like garbage. "People who love you don't throw you away when things get hard," I said quietly. "They stand by you. They fight for you. They catch you when you fall." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw recognition dawn in her eyes. "Like you did. Like you're doing right now. That's what mothers do, baby girl. That's what love does." The tears came then, not the dramatic sobbing of her first night back, but quiet tears of understanding. "I threw you away," she whispered. "I threw away the only person who loved me unconditionally. And for what? For people who never really accepted me anyway." "You were young," I said, though the words couldn't erase 28 years of pain. "You were scared and ambitious, and you made choices based on fear instead of love. How can you forgive me? How can you even stand to look at me after what I did to you?" The question I'd been asking myself for weeks finally had an answer. "Because you're my daughter. Because I understand now that you were as much a victim of that world as I was. And because the woman sitting here with me isn't the same person who walked away from me 28 years ago." And it was true. The Jessica who'd returned to me was different from the one who'd left. She was humbler, more aware of what really mattered, grateful for kindnesses she'd once taken for granted. The arrogance and entitlement that had characterized her younger self had been burned away by loss and betrayal. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in how she related to other people. When I took her to the women's shelter with me, partly because I couldn't leave her alone all day, partly because I wanted her to see what I'd built from the ashes of our relationship, she connected with the residents in ways that surprised us both. "You're Jessica Whitmore," said Maria Santos, a woman who'd fled domestic violence with her 3 children. "I saw you in the papers. You used to be rich." I held my breath, waiting to see how Jessica would respond to this recognition of her fall from grace. "I used to think I was rich," Jessica said quietly. "But I was wrong about what that word means. Real richness is having people who love you for who you are, not what you can do for them. Real richness is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and like the person you see. I never had that when I had money." Maria studied her for a moment. "So, what are you going to do now?" "I'm going to figure out who I really am," Jessica said. "I'm going to try to become someone worthy of the love I threw away." Over the following months, Jessica threw herself into helping at the shelter with the same determination she'd once brought to social climbing. She worked with women who'd lost everything, sharing her own story of fall and redemption, helping them understand that their worth wasn't determined by their circumstances. "I know what it's like to lose everything," she'd tell them. "I know what it's like to discover that the life you built was built on lies. But I also know that losing everything can be the beginning of finding yourself." She was good at it. Her pain had given her empathy, her fall from grace had given her perspective. The women trusted her because she'd been where they were, had lost what they'd lost. "Your daughter is remarkable," said Dr. Patricia Williams, the shelter's board president, during a visit in spring 2010. "She has a gift for connecting with our residents. Have you considered encouraging her to pursue formal training in social work?" I looked across the room where Jessica was helping a young mother fill out job applications, patient and encouraging in a way that reminded me of the caring child she'd once been. "She's finding her calling," I said. "Just like I did, all those years ago." The legal proceedings regarding Christopher's crimes dragged on for over a year. Jessica was never charged. Investigators determined that she'd been deliberately kept ignorant of her husband's illegal activities, but the financial restitution process meant that even her personal belongings were scrutinized and often seized. "I kept thinking they'd find something to let me keep," she told me after the final asset hearing. "Some small thing that would remind me of the life I had. But you know what? I'm glad they didn't. I don't want to remember that life. I want to build a new one." The divorce was finalized in fall 2010. Jessica chose to go back to her maiden name, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "I forgot who I was for 28 years, she explained. "I want to remember." She enrolled in classes at the community college, studying social work like I had decades earlier. At 52, she was often the oldest student in her classes, but she approached her studies with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. Her relationship with her children was more complicated. Michael, 26, and Sarah, 23, had been raised in the Whitmore world of privilege and entitlement. They were angry about their father's crimes, embarrassed by the family scandal, and uncertain about how to relate to a mother they'd barely known during their childhood. "They visit sometimes," Jessica told me after a particularly difficult family meeting. But they don't know me, and I don't know them. I was so busy being Mrs. Christopher Whitmore III that I forgot to be their mother. Now I have to earn the right to that relationship. Children are resilient, I said, remembering my own years of hoping she'd come back to me. Love finds a way, even when it takes time. How did you keep believing I'd come back? How did you wait 28 years without giving up? Because you were my daughter, I said simply. That love, that bond, it's not conditional on behavior or circumstances. It just is like breathing, like the sun rising, like the tide coming in. You don't stop loving your child because they break your heart. You love them through the breaking, you love them in the darkness, and you keep loving them until they find their way back to the light. And slowly, gradually, that's exactly what happened. Not just with Jessica and me, but with Jessica and her children. Love found a way, just like it always does when people are brave enough to try again. It's been 14 years now since that knock on my door in October 2009. As I write this in 2023, I'm 88 years old, and Jessica is 65. We've built something beautiful from the ruins of our broken relationship, not a perfect reconstruction of what we had before, but something deeper, richer, more authentic than what we'd lost. Jessica graduated with her social work degree in 2012 and has been working at the women's shelter ever since. We work together now, mother and daughter, using our combined experiences to help other women navigate the complex terrain of family relationships, financial hardship, and personal reinvention. I can't believe I'm saying this, she told me last week as we reviewed applications for our expanded transitional housing program, but these have been the best years of my life. Not the easiest, but the best. The most real. She's right. These years haven't been easy. I've had health scares, a heart attack in 2015, a broken hip in 2018, that reminded us both how precious time is. Jessica has struggled with depression and anxiety as she's faced the reality of what her choices cost her during those lost decades. We've both had to learn how to be mother and daughter again, how to trust each other, how to love without conditions or expectations. But they've also been years of profound growth and healing. Jessica's relationship with her children has slowly improved. Michael, now 39, brings his own children to visit their grandmother Em, as they call me. Sarah, 36, named her daughter Emily, a gesture that made me cry for hours when I first heard it. They're good kids, Jessica says of her children. They just needed time to understand that having everything isn't the same as having enough. They needed to learn what I'm still learning, that love is what makes you rich, not money. The woman my daughter has become is someone I'm proud to know. She's humble now, grateful, aware of what really matters. She's learned the difference between having wealth and being rich, between being successful and being significant. She's discovered that the love in our little house was worth more than all the mansions she used to live in. She's also discovered something else, that the greatest gifts sometimes come wrapped in the most painful packages. Losing everything taught her what she'd had all along but had been too afraid to value. Christopher's betrayal and imprisonment forced her to confront the emptiness of the life she'd built, but it also brought her home to the love she'd never really lost. I spent 28 years running from who I was, she reflected recently as we sat on our front porch, now reinforced and painted but still the same humble place where we'd shared dreams when she was young. I was so ashamed of being poor, so desperate to prove I belonged somewhere else, that I forgot the most important truth. I already belonged somewhere. I belonged with you. The irony of our story isn't lost on either of us. Jessica achieved everything she thought she wanted: wealth, status, acceptance into the highest levels of society, only to discover that none of it was real. Meanwhile, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered when she rejected me, only to discover that building a life of service and purpose from that pain was the most meaningful thing I'd ever done. You know what's funny? Jessica said one evening last year as we reviewed case files together. When I was married to Christopher, living in that mansion, wearing designer clothes, going to charity galas every week, I was miserable. I felt empty all the time, like I was playing a role that didn't fit. But here, working with women who have nothing, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, shopping at thrift stores again. I'm happier than I've ever been. That's because this is real, I said. This is who you really are. How did you know I'd come back? How did you believe for 28 years that I'd remember who I was? Because I knew the child I'd raised, I said. I knew that underneath all that fear and ambition and desperation to fit in, there was still the little girl who wanted to help people, who had a heart full of compassion. I knew that eventually, life would strip away everything false and leave only what was true. And that's exactly what happened. Life, in the form of betrayal, loss, and the collapse of every artificial support she'd built, stripped away everything false about Jessica's existence and left only what was true, that she was my daughter, that she was capable of love and service, that she had value beyond what any bank account or social register could measure. The women we serve at the shelter often ask us about our relationship, amazed that a mother and daughter who lost each other for nearly 3 decades could rebuild such a strong bond. How do you trust each other again? Asked Carmen Rodriguez last month. Carmen's own daughter had stolen her life savings and disappeared, leaving Carmen homeless and heartbroken. How do you get past that kind of betrayal? Jessica and I looked at each other, sharing the understanding that comes from years of working through pain together. You start with forgiveness, I said. Not because the person deserves it, but because you deserve to be free from the anger that's eating you alive. And then you take it one day at a time, Jessica added. You prove your love through actions, not words. You show up, you do the work, you rebuild trust brick by brick. But what if she hurts you again? Carmen asked. Then we'll deal with that when it happens, I said. But you can't live your life protecting yourself from every possible pain. Sometimes you have to risk being hurt again in order to love again. It's a lesson I learned during those 28 years of loving Jessica from a distance, of never giving up hope even when hope seemed foolish. Love isn't safe. It's the riskiest investment you can make. But it's also the only investment that pays dividends in meaning and joy and connection. Today, as I look at the life we've built together, I'm amazed by how much beauty can grow from broken ground. The women's shelter has expanded to serve 3 counties. Jessica and I have co-authored a book about mother-daughter relationships that's being used in social work programs across the state. We've spoken at conferences about family reconciliation, about the power of unconditional love, about the difference between having money and being rich. But more than any professional accomplishment, I'm proud of the family we've rebuilt. Jessica's children visit regularly now, bringing their own children to spend weekends with Grandma M and their mother. We have Sunday dinners around that same wobbly kitchen table where Jessica used to tell me her dreams, where I once thought I'd lost her forever. Do you ever regret it? Jessica asked me recently. Do you ever wish you'd moved on, built a different life, maybe remarried and had other children? I considered the question seriously. There had been opportunities over the years, good men who'd shown interest, chances to start over with someone who wouldn't break my heart the way she had. But I'd never been tempted. No, I said finally. This is the life I was meant to live. These are the women I was meant to help. And you were always meant to come home eventually. I just had to be patient enough to wait for you to remember the way. What if I'd never come back? What if Christopher hadn't been arrested? If I'd never lost everything? Then I would have kept loving you from a distance, I said without hesitation. I would have kept hoping, kept believing, kept being your mother even if you couldn't be my daughter. That's what love does. It endures everything, believes everything, hopes everything, never fails. Jessica reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers still soft despite years of honest work, mine gnarled with age, but steady with purpose. I love you, Mama, she said, and the words carried the weight of 28 years of silence, of pain transformed into gratitude, of pride swallowed and replaced with humility. I love you too, baby girl, I said. I never stopped. I never could. As the sun sets on my 88th year, I think about the lessons this long, strange, beautiful life has taught me. I think about the young woman I was at 28, raising a brilliant daughter and dreaming of her success. I think about the heartbroken mother I was at 46, watching that daughter walk away from everything we'd built together. I think about the purpose I found in my pain, the calling that emerged from my loss, the strength I discovered in my darkest moments. Most of all, I think about the power of love to endure, to transform, to redeem even the most broken relationships. Jessica's return didn't erase the pain of those 28 years, but it transformed that pain into something meaningful. Every woman we've helped, every life we've touched, every family we've reunited, all of it grew from the soil of our shared heartbreak. I'm Emily Tyler, 88 years old, and this is my comeback story. Not because I got my daughter back, though I'm grateful beyond words that I did, but because I learned that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you invincible. It gives you the strength to wait 28 years for a prodigal daughter to come home. It gives you the wisdom to transform your pain into purpose. It gives you the grace to forgive the unforgivable and the faith to believe in second chances even when first chances seem irretrievably lost. My daughter came home, but more importantly, she came home to herself. She remembered who she was before the world told her who she should be. She rediscovered the values we'd shared in our little house on Maple Street, before wealth and status and fear convinced her to trade love for acceptance. And me? I learned that sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as defeats, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters, that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of your life begin when you think the story is ending. Love wins. It doesn't always win quickly, it doesn't always win easily, but it always wins eventually. That's the message I want to leave with anyone who hears the story. No matter how far someone you love has wandered, no matter how long they've been gone, no matter how much they've hurt you. Love never gives up. Love never fails. Love always finds a way home. Thank you for joining us for this extraordinary story of unconditional love and the power of time to heal even the deepest wounds. If Emily and Jessica's journey moved you, please subscribe to her true stories for more real tales of women rising from heartbreak to healing, from rejection to redemption, from loss to love. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late for love to find its way home, that forgiveness is possible even after decades of pain, and that sometimes the most beautiful reunions come after the longest separations. What's the relationship you've never stopped believing in? What's the love you've never stopped hoping will find its way back to you? Let us know in the comments, and remember, your story of love and redemption might be just beginning. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but love does. And love, real love, unconditional love, is always worth the wait. Thank you for being part of the Her True Stories family. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love to see.